Welcome to Autism and the Brain-Body Connection. This is a workshop that I've put approximately over 100 hours into producing because it's something that I'm passionate about, because it's something that's not well known in society that we're going to be covering, and I have been having some great clinical success in caring for children with autism, as have many of my colleagues. So let's dive into this. So this is a flyer that I use to promote this event, which I put on in my local community. And at the top it says there, the one approach to improving your child's quality of life you have probably never heard of. And that's a pretty bold statement, and I'm going to back it up with plenty of research throughout this presentation. And I think you'll find that, as I stated previously, people just don't know how chiropractic actually impacts the brain and quality of life of children with autism. So let's get into it. You know, the brain is something that we've been fascinated with for centuries, and until recently we really hadn't known a whole lot about how it functions. And quite honestly, even still today, while we have a great knowledge of different regions and pathways, we really are going to be hard-pressed to ever fully understand it. Our brain, our mind, our educated intelligence is a product of it, so it would be pretty difficult to fully understand the amazing capacity of the brain. We have known for some time that there are two basic divisions, that the right side of the brain controls more aspects or is involved in more creative processes, and the left side is more analytical, and some people have more predominance of either side, and it's reflected in their personalities and what they enjoy doing. Now, I found this particular quote from the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke to be both just a nice blend of philosophy and science, and it says that the brain is the most complex part of the human body. This 3-pound organ is the seat of intelligence, interpreter of the senses, initiator of body movement, and controller of our behavior. Lying in its bony shell and washed by protective fluid, the brain is the source of all the qualities that define our humanity. The brain is the crown jewel of the human body. So, you know, just a beautiful way to describe, you know, just how important the brain is. And the nervous system is obviously the most important system of the body, but it is also the most neglected. And it's not until we actually have a problem, you know, that we consciously sense that we look to do something about it. So this is just a little bit about me. I am a pediatric and family chiropractor. I lecture internationally at chiropractic colleges as well as to the public on both chiropractic and general health and well-being. I have my first book coming out soon on that, and it's titled Birthright because I truly believe that it is our birthright to abundant health and happiness, and we know that the body is designed to strive towards health, healing, and wholeness, but as a society we don't typically act congruently with that. So I've always been a constant questioner, and my parents and teachers probably didn't always appreciate it, but it's always served me because I never wanted to take any information at just face value. I've always explored and wanted to know why, and I encourage you to do the same, and especially with information contained in this presentation. I'll have references available. All the studies are in the presentation and reference, so check out all the information for yourself. Some of the questions I really have always been interested in, you know, is what is health and what is healing, and not only that, but what is sickness and what does it mean to really suffer, and illness and suffering are two different things. You know, we tend to identify with sickness and conditions instead of really, as I was talking about earlier, identifying with health, which is our natural normal state. You know, we need to be asking hard questions as a society. This graph shows the increasing incidence of cases of autism that have been diagnosed over the years, from 1 in 10,000 in the 1970s all the way up to 1 in 88, and you can see I have that crossed out because the CDC just months ago announced that that number is now 1 in 50. So it keeps rising, and we need to be asking as a society the hard questions. Why is that happening? This presentation won't go into causation. There's numerous theories, and it's obviously a multifactorial issue going on. But we will go into how we can help the quality of life of those who have been diagnosed with autism and other spectrum disorders. I really believe in this. Labels are made for jars and not people. While I recognize that there's value in naming conditions, I truly believe that understanding the principles of health and the restoration of normal function is what transforms lives. I really support TACA, which is Talk About Curing Autism, because of this statement here. It says some of our families have been told to put their child in an institution. We're hoping for Harvard. And that's a statement all about potential. As parents, we all want the best for our children. We want them to be experiencing their optimum potential, and that's what chiropractic has always been about since its inception. What is life? What is this thing that we call life that science hasn't fully been able to describe? That vital nature of it, and are we just machines? Are we merely the collection of our parts, or is there something more to us? That vital spark of life that we all recognize, or at least the majority of the world does. And in my experience as a healthcare provider in the last 10 years, that has been the reality of most people that come into my office, is that they do recognize that there is more to this existence besides just our physical makeup.
Perceiving is probably the most important condition of being alive. It provides awareness of the world and defines what we call reality by organizing and interpreting information gathered from the limited band of reception of our senses. The purpose of our senses has been evolutionary. Their goal has been to establish reality as something that happens to us, but what we perceive is not what is out there. There is no inherent value in the incredibly complex patterns of light that fall into our eyes, and yet we see coherent forms and motions, enabling us to survive by distinguishing between a flower and a truck running towards us full speed. If we realize that our sensory perception are only an evolutionary tool and not the ultimate reality, then we can start seeing life as a whole undivided totality of which we are an active part.
So I played that video because I believe it's a beautiful representation of what our reality really is. We tend to think of what we are seeing as being real, but really the images that our brain is creating is just that. It's an image of reality, and it's based on information. It's based on the information hitting our sensors, and so this statement says our reality is dependent upon how we perceive the information and not the information alone. The information stays the same. Matter doesn't change, but the way we perceive it is different. We sometimes assume that we all perceive the same reality, but do we all see the same color green? Do we all see the same color red? This is something that is very pertinent to what we're going to be discussing further. So how do we really perceive? Perception is controlled and moderated and integrated by the nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and then we have all the peripheral nerves that go off to every part of the body that are constantly monitoring the environment, both the external environment and also our internal environment. All the organs, glands, tissues, and cells are in constant communication with the brain, and the brain is able to monitor the needs of the body and then adapt. And that's something we don't often think about. Our nervous system is there to adapt us to our environment and to produce successful outcomes and responses so that we can interact with that environment and have a healthy and happy life. So the spinal cord is protected by the spinal column, and that's the main purpose of our skeleton is really to protect that just vital nervous system. The brain is encapsulated in the skull, and then the spinal column houses and protects the spinal cord. Now this number, 11 trillion, represents the estimated number of bits per second that the brain is actually processing. So just an extraordinary amount of information that the brain needs to be aware of and able to process. So, you know, the nervous system is like a sponge. It just soaks in all of that information in our environment, from our proprioceptors, our mechanoreceptors, all of our senses. All that information is constantly just being brought in by the nervous system to allow us to perceive our environment and then to be able to respond appropriately and have hopefully a healthy response. And fortunately, most of us have a fully functioning filter of sorts, which allows us to focus in on certain information and not focus on other things, so that we can really be able to succeed in our environment. If we were bombarded by that information constantly and in our conscious awareness, you know, we wouldn't be able to even function. So fortunately, we have that filter. Now, this slide is talking about mechanoreception and nociception, and what those really are is, you know, we have these sensory nerve endings, and the mechanoreceptors actually detect things such as pressure, vibration. They allow us to feel textures. Those receptors are found in our skin, in our joints especially. A large amount of them are housed mostly in your upper cervical spine or your upper neck area. And then nociceptors are the other type of nerve endings which actually detect harmful stimuli such as temperature changes. You know, if you touch a hot stove, it's because of those nociceptors that allow you to send a message up to the brain, and then your brain can respond and pull away. And so those detectors, nociceptors, detect harmful stimuli. Now, the thing to remember here is that nociceptors don't always register information as pain. So nociceptors can be firing and sending basically static or aberrant information into the brain, and we have no conscious awareness of it. There's no painful awareness. So the combination of those two things really impact our life greatly and give us our experience, which affects our perception and ultimately our reality. So this term, disafferentation, this is referring to an imbalance of sensory information into the brain, or a aberrant or improper information going into the brain. And dis means as in dysfunction, and afferent is referring to the afferent side of the nervous system. There's two sides. Afferent means the information going from the environment, from the external environment, and also our internal environment up into the brain. And then the efferent side, which is information from the brain going to the rest of the body to tell the body what to do, how to respond. If you want to pick an item up off the floor, all the different actions that need to happen are dictated by the brain, and that information is sent over that side. So disafferentation is that imbalance, or that aberrant information going into the brain, and we'll be talking a lot more about that further here. So this graphic, gives a representation of that filter. We should have that filter to process or to filter out all that information we were talking about before. But sometimes there can be a barrier, actually, or irritation or interference to that information before it actually reaches the brain in a negative way. So this graphic really represents the process of life and what's happening. So on the left here we have the senses, and we have all that information is gathered through the afferent side. It goes into the brain. It's then processed, and then if processed correctly, then we should have a healthy adaptation, a healthy output, and a healthy response. And so this typically doesn't change, right? Unless there's a problem with the eye or the actual mechanoreceptors or the nose or the ear, that probably isn't the main problem going on with these children. It's something else. So let's keep going forward here. You've probably all been to the doctor and they've done some reflex testing where they hit your knee with a hammer and the knee kicks, or the leg kicks up, and so that's an example of a healthy response. That's why doctors perform these tests, to give them an interpretation of how well the nervous system is functioning. If it's functioning too slow, that is indicative of a problem, or if there's just too much of a response, then that can also be indicative of a problem. This image here is of the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system is divided into two sides, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system. And basically this represents, that 11 trillion bits of information. The brain constantly has to be aware of what are all the demands of all the organs and systems and cells, and then coordinating all that function and all the needs. So this is something we don't often think about because it's called the autonomic system, like the automatic system. It functions automatically, so we don't have to think about it. As you've been listening or watching this presentation, you haven't been thinking about breathing or thinking about your heart beating, because this system does it for us, thankfully. So this is really what I believe is going on with children who are diagnosed with autism and other disorders within the spectrum, is that their filter is not working, or the information is not reaching the brain and being processed or integrated properly. And so can you just imagine if you didn't have a filter and all that information from the external and internal environment were not being properly integrated, it'd be very hard to respond. And so that's why things like loud noises or touch, big crowds, these sorts of things are highly impactful and difficult for them, because they're experiencing it much differently than you or I, and we often don't realize just what their reality may be. So again, all information is created equally. The information doesn't change, but how we perceive that information is not. This is a video. So that was a video of a video game called Autism, and it's designed to give people a window into the experience that autistic children, individuals may be experiencing, just to help us be more empathetic and understanding of what it may be like. And I have this image here because we are looking at it, and it looks like there's some depth to that, but there really there isn't, right? That's a flat screen. That it's a two-dimensional image, but it looks like it's three-dimensional. And I recently had a occupational therapist come into my office to observe a session with a mutual client, and one of the things she mentioned to me, as she noticed that he did not seem to notice the fish in the aquarium, was her statement was, wow, I wonder if he can even see the fish, because his depth perception may be off. And so I had never even considered that, and I hope you consider it now, that your children or individuals you're caring for, their experience, their reality may be very, very different, and explain why their output is different as well. So this is some of the mechanics of how sensory integration occurs. We have the sensory reception coming in through the eyes, the ears, through the proprioceptive system, balance centers, and that information, proprioceptive information at least, comes up through the spinal cord. All of it's processed in the pons, and also the thalamus, and much of it is integrated through the cerebellum. The cerebellum really integrates that information and then sends off the information and how the body really can use that information to different parts of the brain that will then respond appropriately. So where's the disconnect? The disconnect happens in several different places, but let's talk about it and take a look at this graphic again. We know it's not happening in the matter. The matter is not changing. Is it happening here with the actual sensory organs? Probably not. In some cases, perhaps, but probably not in the majority of cases. What about on the afferent side? That information going into the brain? Is there that information somehow being affected? Is it happening in the brain itself? And the answer to that is really both, in my opinion, based on what the research says. Although most researchers are really focused in on the brain and thinking that this is purely a brain disorder, when in fact it is coming from multiple areas. So here's some of the research out there. This study was looking at persons with autism and versus a control group, and they found that when looking at individuals, people that they knew, looking at faces, that the people with autism, areas weren't lighting up, okay, in parts of the brain, specifically the amygdala, and this study, the researchers, stated that it's really, deficits in the amygdala system there may be the cause, or at least contributing to the problem. Here's some more studies. There's been some data showing that autistic brains develop more slowly than healthy brains. The structure of language pathways differs in nonverbal autism versus those that have verbal capabilities. And again, they're looking at the brain as being the primary piece to the puzzle. And this is a recent article from the Los Angeles Times, and it's asking the question, is the autistic brain too wired or not wired enough? And really it says that it's both, that some areas have been shown that there's too much connection, and other areas where there's not enough connection. So why is it? Because I also agree with that it is really both. So this term neuroplasticity is really the reason why it's both. Neuroplasticity is a fairly new term, and plastic meaning malleable or changeable, neuro obviously relating to the nervous system. So what this term really represents is that the brain is capable of changing itself. And this doctor wrote this book, The Brain That Changes Itself, which goes into this more in depth. And let's watch this quick video that really explains the concept.
Until very recently, our best and brightest scientists and physicians believed that the adult brain couldn't change. Our brain circuits were formed and finalized in childhood. Now we discover that the brain is plastic, meaning changeable. But not all change is good. That changing brain can actually do us harm. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even schizophrenia. But the mind can harness the damaged brain's plasticity to change itself. And now we are finding new treatments for mental diseases and disorders once thought incurable.
We might actually change the whole course, the whole trajectory of someone's life.
It changes brains physically, it changes them chemically, it changes them functionally.
We do not yet see where the limits will be. There are still big new surprises.
My name is Dr. Norman Deutsch, and I wrote a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. The discovery of neuroplasticity is the discovery that our brains can change their structure and function through mental experience alone. It signals the most important change in our understanding of the brain in 400 years, because for 400 years we thought of the brain as though it were like a machine with parts, and that view of the machine-like brain gave rise to a neurological fatalism, because it meant people who were born with brain damage or who sustained brain damage as they developed were condemned to live with it, because machines do many glorious things, but they don't grow new parts and they can't reorganize themselves.
So we know that's not true now. We do know that the brain can in fact change itself and create new pathways, and this is really how that happens. Neuroplasticity represents, there's a mental activity, there's a thought, feeling, or action, and this creates new neural structures, and that's because neurons that fire together create stronger synapses and communication pathways, and that repetition leads to even more strengthening. And so this is how all learning happens. It's how the development of new skills, techniques such as golfing, walking, talking, all these things are a part of how the brain really develops and creates new skills and pathways. So this is a huge concept, and is going to be really important as we go further. So we know that the brain can rewire, readjust, and relearn. Neurons that fire together wire together. Also, if it's really a use it or lose it issue going on, and we all realize this when we aren't working out. We start to atrophy, and so it's the same with our brain. If we aren't using a part of our brain, then those connections start to not be as strong. So here we are back to that word disafferentation, and again, remember, that's an imbalance of sensory information into the brain. So we know that the brain changes itself based on information, based on its experience, what's going on, and so this is a really big deal. So here's what disafferentation really is. It's a decrease in mechanoreception. If you remember, mechanoreceptors are those receptors that basically detect the environment and give information to the brain so it can respond appropriately. And then nociception, nociceptors are those receptors that detect harmful or painful stimuli. And something really important to remember here is that nociception does not equal pain. Nociceptors do not always generate a pain response, and so that's a big deal. So the combination of those two things, decreased mechanoreception and increased nociception, leads to central and peripheral sensitization of the spinal cord and brain, which is neuroplasticity. It causes a stress response, that fight or flight response, which causes a cascade of chemicals to be released that increase disease susceptibility and have potential global effects on things such as coordination, emotion, and visceral function. So here we are back to this graphic. So that's where disafferentation occurs. The information is distorted as it is being sent to the brain. So the quality of our lives really depends upon the quality of the information and also the ability to respond in a healthy manner. So what do I mean by quality? I mean that we have to eat well, we need to get plenty of rest, those sorts of things. We need to have a healthy lifestyle, but you can be doing all of those things great, and if the information isn't getting to the brain, then there's not going to be a healthy response. So where's the disconnect? We're back to this. I put there, it takes a village, because I'm certainly not suggesting that chiropractic is a cure for autism, or that chiropractic is the only way to impact the quality of life of individuals that have been diagnosed with autism. It absolutely takes a village, and that goes from occupational therapists to medical doctors to naturopaths. All speech pathologists. There's all sorts of individuals that have a piece in the puzzle in helping this multifactorial issue. But here's that one issue or one type of care that has not been explored as a society. So this study was exploring the neuromodulatory effects of vertebral subluxation in chiropractic care. And they found that vertebral subluxation creates neuroplastic changes, which is very important here, is functional neuroplastic changes. So functional meaning reversible, okay, in the central nervous system due to altered afferent input. So disafferentation, altered information going into the central nervous system. So what is vertebral subluxation? So it's a concept that society has not really heard, or if they have, they've heard it in an inappropriate or misrepresented way most often. So a subluxation is basically a misalignment of the spinal column, which negatively affects neurophysiological function. We know, based on the studies I'm going to show just in a second here, that if you alter joint function, it's going to alter the information reaching the central nervous system. And this is what it creates. It creates disafferentation. It causes, we know, decreased mechanoreception and increased nociception, which leads to all those things we've described already. This study did a review of all this information we're talking about, and it was looking at the likely mechanisms involved in the different symptoms that can be created by vertebral subluxation. It found that the decreased spinal joint range of motion decreases that proprioceptive or mechanoreceptive input and increases the nociceptive input, as we've been discussing. And that the afferents, those mechanoreceptors and nociceptors from spinal structures, end in the cerebellum. Okay, and that's important because the cerebellum, again, is that main area that integrates sensory information, and also this leads to neuroplasticity. This doctor found that the movement of the spine stimulates the cerebellum. Again, more research just supporting what we're talking about here. And again, more supporting documentation, again, that cervical spine manipulation actually alters the sensory motor integration, okay? They found that somatosensory evoked potential study showed that there were changes pre and post chiropractic adjustments. This study looked at the effect of cervical adjustments on elbow joint position sense, which is basically, if you close your eyes right now and imagine where your elbow is, or if you try to touch your finger to your nose, that is all coordinated by our proprioceptive system. And they found that elbow joint position sense increased following cervical adjustments, so adjustments of the cervical spine or of the neck. So subluxation also leads to dysponesis, and dysponesis is basically misdirected neurophysiologic reactions, errors in energy expenditure, and which leads to potential for functional disorders. And this paper is looking at dysponesis and subluxation, and it says that dysponesis refers to a reversible physiopathologic state. So that's, again, highly important right there, reversible, consisting of errors in energy expenditure, which are capable of producing functional disorders. The resulting aberrant muscle activity may be evaluated using surface electrode techniques, typically static surface electromyography or SEMG, with axial loading is used to evaluate innate responses to gravitational stress. So here's a segmental EMG scan right here. That is common in many chiropractic offices, which we use in our office. And what it's measuring is basically the muscle activity along the spine. And it's done in a seated position, so there's no conscious activation of the muscles. And we see that there's various imbalances here. So white indicates normal activity, green is a mild stress, blue is moderate, red is high levels of activity or stress, and black is really extreme. So it should be pretty even, right? We should have a balanced activity from side to side. So when we see this, we're seeing representation of dysponesis, which is that those errors in energy expenditure. And what does that mean, clinically or for an individual? Well, it means that the individual has muscles firing at an abnormal rate, which means that they're going to have less energy for other activities, for digestion, for cognition, for other things that those resources could be going towards. And it's also indicator of neurological dysfunction. So important information here. Vertebral subluxation leads to dysautonomia, okay, which is basically malfunction of that autonomic system or automatic system we were talking about earlier. And in this study, the paper states autonomic dystonia may be evaluated by measuring skin temperature differentials. So again, measuring the difference between the two sides of the spine, the paraspinal tissues, and measuring those skin temperature differences. And again, it should be pretty even from side to side, right? In this paper, the authors found that these values can be used as a standard in assessment of sympathetic nerve function. And the degree of asymmetry is a quantifiable indicator of dysfunction. So the more asymmetry, the more dysfunction happening in the sympathetic nervous system. So deviations from the normal values will allow suspicion of neurological pathway to be quantitated, and therefore can improve assessment and lead to proper clinical management. Skin temperature differentials are associated with vertebral subluxation. Okay, so another tool that chiropractors use to measure the neurophysiological effects of subluxation, and also to perform post scans to measure the correction and improvement in neurological function. So you probably have all heard of the fight or flight response. It's basically mediated by our sympathetic system, and it's a healthy response to a dangerous situation that we may encounter, such as a tiger or a burglar. Our sympathetic system will kick in, and we'll go either into a fight or flight mode. And if there's a tiger, it's a good idea to run, and probably a burglar in many cases. But whatever it is, what happens, the sympathetic nervous system creates a cascade of events which secrete numerous hormones, chemicals that increase heart rate and force of contraction, increased dilation of the lung bronchioles, basically so your body can get into a healthy adaptation to the demand, whatever it may be. Now this is a problem only when the parasympathetic system, the opposite half of the autonomic system, doesn't kick in and doesn't bring your body back into a normal balanced state. And in our society, we're suffering from sympathetic overdrive for various reasons. Our lifestyle, mental emotional stress, we're in a chronic sympathetic overdrive. And the thing is that subluxation also contributes to this. If we see this is imagery of the anatomy of the neck, and we're looking at the superior cervical ganglia, the middle cervical ganglia, and these other regions in the lower part of the neck. And the sympathetic system, majority it is really controlled and housed in this region, so it has wide impact on the function of the body when that area is irritated or stimulated artificially by the presence of subluxation. And this study really helps confirm that as well. They're looking at metabolic changes after chiropractic adjustments. And some of what they saw was increased glucose metabolism in different parts of the brain, and decreased metabolism in other parts, such as the cerebellum. And in questionnaires, some of the things they noticed were indicated lower stress levels and better quality of life. But really, the results of the study suggest that chiropractic adjustments or manipulation affects regional cerebral glucose metabolism related to sympathetic relaxation. Okay, so what we're talking about there is a decreased sympathetic tone or decreased sympathetic response. And this study looked at heart rate variability. Okay, and heart rate variability is a really important indicator of how the autonomic system is functioning and how balanced it is. Basically, our hearts contain a pacemaker of sorts, which will make sure that the rhythm is balanced. And so we can measure this slight deviations in heart rate variability. There should be a rhythmic level of variation. And so when we see that that variation is not present, studies have shown that that's actually an indicator of autonomic dysfunction. So this study states that the decreased heart rate and increased total power from the heart rate variability analysis indicate a healthy autonomic nervous system balance after correction of vertebral subluxation. So you may be wondering, how common is vertebral subluxation? And when I asked this question in live groups, by now they realize that it's very common. This study looked at 1,000 infants during the first month of life and found that 80% were found to have vertebral misalignments of the upper neck. Another study here looked at 1,250 infants, and they were evaluated during the first 5 days of life. And it was found that 90% had suffered birth trauma and strain through the neck and cranial areas, with 10% suffering more severe trauma. And may be wondering why that is. And this imagery, certainly shows us one reason. And there's huge amounts of pressure just in an even normal vaginal birth upon the cervical spine of an infant. And it's something that we are just not have not recognized as society as being an important factor in dysfunction of an infant and impacting their quality of life. We often think of kids and we say, well, they bounce back from falls and injuries and things, and yes, they do. But they also, especially at this age, they don't tell us that there's a problem. A lot of times these problems are manifested by things such as colic, trouble breastfeeding, failure to thrive, these sorts of things. So in this paper, Dr. Tobin says the birth process, even under optimal control conditions, is potentially a traumatic, crippling event for the fetus. Spinal cord and brainstem injuries occur often during the process of birth, but frequently escape diagnosis. So what causes subluxation? And basically, it's one thing, it's stress, but it's three different types of stress: physical stress that we just discussed, such as falls, injuries, the birth process, repetitive strains from postural issues, mental emotional stress, and chemical stress, things in our environment, things that we eat and are exposed to. And the nervous system is designed to handle stress, obviously, or else we wouldn't be able to function. However, it has its limits and can only handle a certain, so much. So as more and more stress is encountered in all these different ways, the body can no longer adapt to that stress, and subluxation will occur. And then the thing about that is that once subluxation is present, it now further impacts the body's ability to handle stress and adapt to stress, because the nervous system is now compromised. And this study here was really looking at how the body handles stress, and actually how its ability to handle stress is improved while under regular chiropractic care. And they looked at serum thiol levels, which are an indicator of how well the body is able to reduce oxidative stress. And as we know, oxidative stress is a factor in aging, cancer, degenerative conditions. And what this study showed was that chiropractic had a positive impact on reducing oxidative stress, because serum thiols are a surrogate measure of DNA repair enhancement. So some really cool studies and research, and an area where we need to really keep going and funding this type of research. So here we have some scans of a couple of cases in my office. So this is the initial thermographic scan of a 3-year-old who was diagnosed with autism. As you can see there, there's some, the red indicates very high levels of stress, temperature ranges that would be considered abnormal. And if we go back to that previous study and slide, we know that the degree of asymmetry and is an indicator of more dysfunction. When he first came to me, he had very little communicative capacity, was only speaking in 1 to 2 words at a time, no sentences, behavioral issues, lots of outbursts, and lots of stimming behavior. Stimming is when a child will do various repetitive motions or flapping of the hands, those sorts of things, which are basically the body, it's a way the child is trying to get sensory information into their brain and basically feed that need, which is not being met appropriately. And so this is his initial scan, and this is his follow-up scan 2 months later. As you can see, the white areas indicate balance, normal numbers there. Green indicates mild stress. Blue is moderate, and then there's still a high point right there. But as you can see, a huge change from the first scan. And what did that mean for the child? Well, even before this scan was taken, we saw big jump in his ability to communicate. He started going to sentences with 3 to 4 words, responding to requests, and for this particular child, he started calling his mother, mom, which he hadn't done before. He was showing more emotion, much more eye contact, and sociability. So some huge changes in his quality of life. Here's another scan of a 4.5-year-old who was diagnosed with autism, and here we see some very high levels of stress there. And here's his follow-up scan, and this individual also had a lot of stimming with flapping of the hands, and could not handle social situations, being in large groups. Even when he first came into the office, there was another child in the office, and he wanted to leave immediately. The mother indicated that even with family, cousins, he just couldn't really be around them, and would have just emotional breakdowns. And so one of the very first things within the first 2 weeks of care, the stimming, the flapping of the hands really stopped, and we also noticed much more eye contact, interaction with others, to the point where his mother indicated they had just gone to a birthday party, and he was playing with the other kids. He's been playing at the park with other children, whereas before he would not have been able to do so. So just some really cool and amazing changes in quality of life for these children. This is the ATEC. It's the Autism Treatment Evaluation Checklist, and is produced by the Autism Research Institute, and it's available for parents and researchers, providers to use in evaluating the effectiveness of a particular intervention. And I use this form to really document the changes in quality of life that are occurring while people are under chiropractic care within the autism spectrum. And it's a self-rated form by parents, and I have them filled out on the first visit, and then follow-up visits either between every 1 to 2 months. And what I found in preliminary data here, and it's based on small samples at this time, but the pre-care average score on the left, this is the initial score of 78. The lower the number, the better. And the 2-month average right now is at 48. And so this is, just another way to really document, the amazing changes in quality of life. The most common improvements so far have been in language and sociability. Those are the two main areas that have been showing improvement.
We do not yet see where the limits will be. There are still big new surprises.
So, there are definitely going to be a lot more surprises in the future of autism. The research that's going to be coming out in future years, and just with new technology and imaging of the brain. And I am very confident that chiropractic is one of those surprises that the world just doesn't know about yet, they've not been exposed to what chiropractic really is and how it positively impacts the brain and quality of life of these children. And it's an area that I'm dedicated to. I am pursuing research in this area with case studies and developing a research project that I'll be attempting to get grants for, to really show the before and after of what's happening with the brain. And so with the functional MRIs and that sort of thing, we'll be able to really track what is happening as a child is undergoing chiropractic care. So I really like this quote from this author, Anais Nin, and she said, "We do not see things as they are, we see things as we are." And this is absolutely true. Not only our belief systems, our beliefs will really dictate how we see the world, but on a fundamental level, just how are we even able to develop those beliefs by the information that from our environment that we're able to process or not. And for many of these children, as we've gone over, they're not experiencing their optimal potential because there's a major barrier. And as I stated before, subluxation is not the only barrier in their lives. There's other issues going on, from gut issues to mental, emotional, psychosocial issues as well. But subluxation can be a major factor, and all children should be screened for it to see if it's a barrier to their improvement and quality of life. So by now you're probably wondering, is subluxation present, in your own child or perhaps even yourself? As we stated earlier, it's extremely common. It's unrecognized by most of society at this point. I'm dedicated to spreading this information and sharing it with others. If you are a parent and would like to have your child screened for vertebral subluxation, I can certainly help you find a chiropractor that works specifically in this area. I will put some information at the end of this presentation. You can go to the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association webpage and find a doctor that way. Or if you'd like to contact me personally, I have a network of chiropractors that I can refer you to. If you're a researcher or provider and would like more information or to collaborate on a research project, I would love to communicate with you and assist any way I can in furthering that goal. Thank you all for your time. I wish you all the best in this journey, and that your children are able to really experience and reach their optimum potential.